All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at lunchtime lecture. I'd like to start the program with an acknowledgement that University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji, Cree, Dakota, Dene peoples, and on the homelands of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. With that, welcome everyone to this interesting, exciting lecture today. We have a speaker, Anna Ingebrigtsen. Is that right?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I always have difficulty pronouncing your last name. Anyway, she's joining us to deliver a lecture, her journey really from U of M undergraduate to current position, and also the things that she's working on, which is exciting. I would invite everyone to use the chat line to raise any questions ongoingly. And also if you have an opportunity to turn on your camera to just acknowledge that you're there in face, I think that would be also as well welcomed as well. Anna is a graduate of University of Manitoba Environmental Design Program. And she went on to study at KTH, Sweden, and Delft in Netherlands, studying in master's level, both. So she holds 2 masters from these institutions, architecture, urbanism, building science, but you worked with Y Factory, Urban Think Tank, and also critical studies in design studio, which sort of segues in the theme of feminist architecture theory, analysis, laboratory education, which is very exciting, interesting. I read your little article about TN topics of transgression, which is quite interesting as well. So she comes with these sort of multiple backgrounds. She has practiced within architecture, urban design, landscape architecture, Vancouver, Stockholm, and Toronto, including urban as an urban designer and urban strategies, which in Toronto, as some of you know. And she recently taught at University of Waterloo as an adjunct professor. She's currently a senior landscape architect with FORAC, which is also interesting in Toronto. Her interest includes sustainable urban resiliency, immersive playscapes, and alternative practices. She was always active. She was vice president of SAS when she was going through the program here, and she's still active and doing interesting work. So with that, welcome, Anna.
Thank you. That was such a thorough introduction. Thank you. It's really, really nice to be here. I'm super honored. Lovely introduction, Jay. Thanks. Should I just get started?
Let's get started.
Okay, cool. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I am so grateful for this opportunity to speak at my old stomping grounds. It's just such a huge honor. So I'm here to talk to you about my journey after U of M, about how I ended up where I am, and a little about where I work today. The title of this lecture, I literally do not know what I'm doing, actually comes from a hat. It's just over here. I was at my friend's house and it made me laugh so hard I went out and bought it. I had to, but like all good humor, there are a few layers of truth in there that we can tease apart. There's a kind of liberation in these admissions. When you just say the truth, it is freeing. We as designers, artists, builders, we share some common personality traits. Perfectionism is a common one. And we often feel we have to constantly prove ourselves. I geek out on the work of Dr. Brene Brown, researcher, storyteller, professor, best-selling author, podcaster, social scientist. She talks a lot about the difference between being right and getting it right. The moment we begin being the knower and stop being the learner, we go into the ego zone. The pursuit of learning, the love of the journey, and the joy of the endeavor are gone. And the work becomes grueling. That's why the idea of the expert is so flawed. This attachment to the idea of expertise and never getting anything wrong. How can you co-create if all the expertise is in you alone? You have gifts that you want to share, but they'll come through the expression with others. They manifest in the expression of conversation, collaboration. It's always in co-creation. It always co-emerges. And so when I talk about not knowing what I'm doing, what I'm really saying is I give myself permission to be playful, to not have all the answers, to explore, to ask for help, to be curious, and to never stop being the learner. Design culture, as it is, has many advantages, but imagine how much greater it could become if we embrace the mistakes, embrace taking the long path, the winding path. And there's not failures or taking too long, but earnest attempts and necessary steps in the process. Professional design culture could achieve such great heights if we focused more on curiosity, openness, and encouragement. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, let's get back to the beginning. My name is Ingebrigtsen. I'm a senior landscape architect at Warwick and occasional adjunct professor at the University of Waterloo. I graduated from the Bachelor of Environmental Design program about 13 years ago, and have since studied in Vancouver and the Netherlands and Sweden, and I work now here in Toronto. And my journey has been anything but a direct path, and at times has felt like living inside a bouncy ball. Something we learn as designers is that if we have an idea that we believe in, and if that idea doesn't yet exist in the world, we should explore it thoroughly and perhaps find a way to create it. After graduating from the Bachelor of Environmental Design program in architecture, I felt excited about becoming an architect. And yet there was this persistent whisper from my gut, a dissatisfaction with the discourse around landscape architecture within architecture. I was unconvinced that architects had this sort of deeper understanding of environment beyond slapping on a green roof or fulfilling a LEED checklist. I wanted to get closer to the natural systems, enough to wrap my arms around questions like, how does water make its way from the soil up into the leaves? And questions like that, like the tree hugger that I am. So with the help from former Dean, Dr. Richard Prawn, and many others, I was granted permission to continue my studies for another year, but this time in landscape architecture. I studied critical technical courses, site grading, ecology. I did master's level landscape studio and GIS course. Basically, I crafted myself a double major. And it was in this course that I explored what impacts climate change will have on our coastal communities, and what we as designers can offer to mitigate the damage. We thought about questions like, how do we cope with rising sea levels? How should a city grow? Can cities be amphibious? It's funny because a month ago, when I was a guest critic at the fourth year architecture studios at Waterloo, guess where our project brief was located? Guess what questions we were asking? These questions are more relevant and urgent than ever, and I want you to ask yourself, what is my relationship with water? I wanted to get closer to that too, and after multiple summers of surfing and dirt bagging on Canada's west coast, I made the inevitable move to Vancouver. I began at PWL Partnership as a landscape designer. PWL are a team of landscape architects, urban designers, and site planners who transform the built and natural environment into vibrant and really memorable destinations in ways that honor the cultural, historic, and environmental attributes of place. This was one of the projects I worked on. It's like a mixed use development, and it was the first in Vancouver's initiative to densify areas around SkyTrain stations. The Muse gives pedestrians direct access to shopping, businesses, SkyTrain stations. A water feature incorporates the names of each of the Fraser's nearby tributaries, and hard landscape elements are animated with First Nations art. Old maps are inscribed in the stairwell. There's a 30,000 square foot green roof, which creates an urban ecology supporting local insects and birds. I was not always the best at graphics, but I had ideas, and that matters. This is the master plan for UBC's Totem Park residences, which aim to break down barriers of the old site and create more openness. We custom designed harvest tables for people to gather at. We have bridges to the doorways over rainwater gardens, and everything was about protecting the old cedar trees in the middle. I remember Eduardo Aquino telling me something years ago that has really stuck with me. He said something like, choose where you want to live and then make your life there. I think about this a lot because I haven't followed this advice whatsoever. I've always moved for school or work. But everywhere I've lived, I've heeded the call of adventure that drives me, not just as a person, but as a designer. In Vancouver, every week I went hiking and rock climbing, and I tried hopelessly to memorize all of the ferns and their properties on the entire coast of British Columbia. PWL is about a block from the ocean, right at Cole Harbour waterfront. So during lunch sometimes, colleagues and I would go for runs through Stanley Park. We called them runches. Or we'd walk over to the Vancouver Convention Center to admire the 6-acre green roof, another project by PWL. Years went by, and that whisper from my gut was back. I'd come to learn a little more about the flow of natural systems, how to plan resilient neighborhoods, what kinds of plant communities thrive in urban centers. But I'd missed architecture and academia and big ideas and critical conversations. I applied to grad schools across Europe and moved to Holland that fall for a Master of Science in Architecture, Urbanism, and Building Sciences. TU Delft is one of the most established faculties of architecture in the Netherlands, and was ranked second in the world's top universities several years in a row. I lived in Rotterdam and commuted daily by bike and train to the small canal-ringed city of Delft, once home to Dutch master painter Johannes Vermeer. Now, for a kid from Winnipeg, this was like Hogwarts. There were no cauldrons or broomsticks or moving staircases, but let me tell you, there was magic everywhere. Bold, exuberant colors around every corner, a famous chair collection down one hallway, courtyards between buildings transformed into sunlit space frame atriums. All the furniture is by Swiss design brand Vitra, all of it. And of course, the famous library, the People's Palace by Mechanou. One of my favorite projects from undergrad was MVRDB's the Netherlands Pavilion at the 2000 World Expo in Hanover. In the pavilion, 6 Dutch landscapes were stacked vertically to form an independent ecosystem, communicating this notion of cultural sustainability. The project asked, what role will nature play with such an increase in density? It sought to reflect on this idea of a new nature, a mix of technology, art, and nature. And my new studio professor was no other than Winnie Mass himself. He runs a studio called the Y Factory, a think tank for urban futures. And this was our classroom. It's a giant orange pyramid. The year was 2010 and was declared by the UN as the International Year of Biodiversity. So all of our studio briefs were focused on creating biodiversity in our future cities and asked, how can we coexist with animals? I started by studying how bees might inhabit old forgotten chimneys in Amsterdam households. Up until this point, discourse on sustainability still felt somewhat new, fresh, didn't yet have that urgency, I think, that it does today. It would be the theme or the chapter of a student project or like an added value for a client. It may have seemed progressive to propose a carbon neutral design, which was fully accessible to all ages and abilities, supportive of diverse human and non-human species. Whereas now, we know that sustainable strategies must be inextricably integrated into each and every moment in a project. All we have to do is look out our windows to grasp the gravity of the climate crisis, and that these are not value adds, but are rather critical contributions that impact our survival in the long term. I think there is a lot of room for designers to claim some agency and be really intentional with our voice and decisions. There are many different ways that we can think about sustainability. And while I enjoyed the creative rigor in the studio, it wasn't getting at the questions that I had. The ambitions seemed to be missing some soul, and I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed with the singularly metrics-driven approach to sustainability. Well into the school year, I received a message from one of the other universities that I'd applied to. It was Kungliga Tekniska Högskolan, or KTH, KTH, the Royal University of Technology in Stockholm. They had a place available for me to start the next semester. The university was significantly smaller than TU Delft, lower in the rankings. But with a fraction of the class size and permanent studio desk, there would be more one-on-one teaching moments and opportunities for studio culture. Students out there, do not underestimate the learning that happens with your classmates. The cross-pollination of ideas on those late nights in studio, that's the good stuff. And that's invaluable. It will serve you forever. As all architecture students know, it's an exciting time when you get the descriptions of all the different studios offered that year. You have before you this menu of delicious options and have to decide which new constellation you will thrust your imagination into for the coming months. What drew me to KTH was one in particular. It was called the Critical Studies Design Studio and was run by a group called FATAL, which is an acronym for Feminist Architectural Theory Analysis Laboratory Education, who were and are to this day some of the leading critical theorists and feminist architects from all across Europe and the UK. The FATAL studio works with critical and feminist strategies in architecture and design based on theories of gender, queer, post-colonial, and power relations. The studio engages in subversive and dialogical research and design practices applied to specific themes and locations. I want you to think about that for a second. Because today in 2021, this discourse, while perhaps sometimes on the fringe, it has begun to be a little more normalized, more widely absorbed into the design world. But even just a decade ago, it was pretty radical. I remember sitting at my bedroom desk reading the course description and my chest was like bursting with hope and excitement. I'll also mention that up until this point, I'd only had one woman professor, one woman boss. And as we know, representation matters. I looked forward to a place where I could learn from architects of all genders, where alternative practices and spaces were not questioned, but encouraged. Isn't this also a way of thinking about sustainability? At this point in my life, it was probably one of the biggest decisions I'd had to make. I just moved across the world and settled in. Was I really about to pack everything up and do it all over again? Well, I literally didn't know what I was doing. So I had to call on my best friends and see what they thought. Now, the Bachelor of Environmental Design degree provided me with the foundational building blocks that I needed to become a designer. But for my master's degree, I wanted to experiment, push limits, recognize the authenticity of my own inner voice. I'm sure you've all had to make hard decisions at some point in your career so far. It's an opportunity, ultimately, to get to know yourself a little more deeply. When I thought of TU Delft, I saw what was. And the more I learned about KTH, the more I saw the world unfolding, the more I saw what could be. And so I moved to the Northlit capital of Scandinavia in the dead of winter. I explored self-organizing floating communities. Asked, what if concrete foundations could float? Can architecture play a role in dissolving segregative, discriminatory, and xenophobic behavior? Is it possible to find home in public space? I defended my thesis, Grounds for Healing, Tales of Toxic Terrain. I proposed the restoration of Ingebrigtsen's Contaminated Grounds, a legacy of Alfred Nobel's dynamite production. I asked, how can we live with toxicity? My design sows phytoremediating meadows, extracts toxins, harvests, decomposes, burns, and grows new crops. Elevated pathways offer a procession through the site to green roofs, mountain paths, an open kitchen and hearth, a floating barge with biopools and a sauna. As the fields are healed, the structures move into the barge and sail to the next polluted sites. One of the benefits of having a home base in the EU is the proximity to other countries, other languages and cultures. The university education was the excuse to get me there, but every day was full of new impressions and experiences. There were great challenges, but there were also great moments of growth and transformation. We went on study trips to Ireland and England, did workshops at King's College and UCL. We traveled to Kiruna, beyond the Arctic Circle, to learn about Sami peoples. I went with friends to family homes, farms, cottages, saunas. I had dinner at the Royal Palace with the Swedish Marines. I spent Christmas skiing with my relatives in Norway. I visited the Bartlett School of Architecture summer exhibition. I attended Documenta, the world's largest art expo in Kassel, Germany. I hiked along fjords and sailed through archipelagos. In case you were wondering, the meal at the Royal Palace wasn't that fancy. We actually, I think, had like hot dogs or something. But let me check myself. Objectively speaking, I had a very privileged experience. I'm fortunate to have had these opportunities and grateful to have had the health and resources to explore them. After graduation, I stayed on in Sweden working as a junior architect. Despite having finished school, secured a job, and settled in a city I loved with a community of friends, this was a difficult time for me. It was one thing to be in school abroad, but quite another to be working abroad, and much less in another language. And for those of you who do this every day, I see you. It is not easy. I was burnt out from finishing my thesis and struggled to express my ideas in another language. Learning a new software was going really slowly. And most of all, I struggled to belong. To belong in this foreign professional culture. After several months of striving and straining, my work contract was not renewed, which meant my work permit would expire, which meant that if I couldn't secure a job in a few weeks, I would become an illegal alien. I realized that I would have to leave, and that hit me really hard. Here I was, not entirely knowing what I was doing, but giving it all I had. I thought I knew what I wanted and was working towards that, but it didn't work out. I think one of the biggest fears that we as humans face is that of not being good enough, that we'll be left behind, that we'll disappoint, be rejected, abandoned. Have you ever felt like that? It's an intolerably uncomfortable place to be. And we don't sit there long enough in that discomfort to fully understand how much power it has in our lives. I may not have appreciated that at the time, but in those struggles with the decisions we are forced to make, they carve out who we become. You're forced to face truths like, what do you really care about? Despite some half-baked marriage proposals from my closest friends in Sweden, I flew back to Canada. I spent the summer cycling around Winnipeg and tending to my father's veggie garden. I needed to rest and recalibrate. I wish I had thought harder about where I wanted to live and channel some of Eduardo's advice. But what I did instead was create an Excel document of the coolest firms in Canada from east to west and began applying to them in exactly and precisely that order. This is an example of me thinking I know what I'm doing, but maybe going just a little bit too quickly. Before I knew it, I was interviewing in Toronto and shortly began at SBN Architects and Planners. SBN are a multidisciplinary team of architects, planners, urban designers, and landscape architects. I cannot say that at this time I confidently knew what I was doing, but I was starting to feel as though I knew a few things. I had some skills, some preferences. I really liked master planning, but I knew I was still missing some key pieces in my tool belt. Working for some years in the big city had introduced me to real world processes, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit that at this point, this far along, I'd never heard of an official plan. I hadn't seen a land use map or understood that most projects go through the sort of three-phase SD, DD, CD. I was realizing that contrary to being told that it's better to specialize in one's career, I wanted to be a generalist. I wanted to know everything. I still hadn't really decided if I wanted to focus on architecture or landscape architecture, but I figured that either way, knowing about urban design and planning would serve me well. I needed to learn about local planning regulations, municipal policies, city green standards, development guidelines, building code, liabilities. Now, was I putting off the real question because I was afraid that I didn't know what I was doing? Perhaps. But I also saw this as an opportunity to learn more, to broaden my design experience and become as well-rounded a practitioner as I possibly could. I moved to Urban Strategies, one of Canada's leading urban planning and design firms. I was at times a fish out of water, but I love working at large scales, master planning campuses, waterfront communities, urban renewal projects. In urban design, there exists a perfect blend of architecture and landscape architecture. Both the built and natural environments that I find really attractive. I required sensitivity for culture and empathy for residents, understanding of multiple transportation nodes, climatic factors, water systems, waste systems, energy systems, ecosystems. Requires a vision for futures very different from our current reality. You need the ability to scale slide, a patience for endless reconfiguration, providing safe and equitable infrastructure and public spaces, stabilities, flexibilities, resiliencies. I've always been a generalist, and by nature, urban design is interdisciplinary. So, just like in high school, when I wanted to be a triple threat, aka dancing, singing, and acting, so too in adulthood did I want to excel in multiple fields, to be what Emily Wapnick describes in her famous TED Talk, a multi-potential light. I decided that now, several years into my career, it was time to pursue some kind of professional license or accreditation. But should I become an architect or a landscape architect? It's a very long and expensive process involving up to 5 exams, oral exams, collecting hundreds of hours of experience. Or perhaps I should just throw in the towel, move to Hollywood, become an art director, like my high school aptitude test results had told me to. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and desperately wished that I'd started this process right out of school like everybody else. Like I told you, I literally didn't know what I was doing, but I decided landscape architecture. Perhaps there's a few profs here today who are chuckling because they saw this in me all along. But still, I had to set out on this big journey before circling back around the regular Winnipesian Odysseus. Anyway, the truth is that landscape architecture was the fight I wanted to champion. To begin this process, one needs to work under an advisor holding a professional license. So I had to switch firms once more. The provincial and national Society of Landscape Architects do this to support and monitor budding landscape architects. And it also introduces the concept of mentorship. For the students in the audience, I cannot tell you how important it is to cultivate professional mentors. So this is what brought me to FOREC, where I am today. And the mentorship is something I have found both formally and informally at FOREC. And it has enriched my life in profound and invaluable ways. FOREC is an experience design company. We are architects, landscape architects, interior designers, graphic designers, and concept artists. About 120 to 140 people around the world work at FOREC. We have our HQ here in Toronto, but we have teammates in Florida, California, Colorado, and China. We design both locally and globally. For example, one of my current projects is designing a heritage railcar plaza in Markham. However, my project for the last 20 months was a resort in Asia. FOREC designs residential, mixed use, entertainment, and visitor attractions, institutional, waterfronts, streetscapes, public parks, theme parks, water parks, transit infrastructure, green corridors, the list goes on. What I think is really special about us is that these 5 different disciplines are not siloed. It's common for multidisciplinary firms to offer different studios, but in practice, they're usually isolated and not integrated. But because FOREC frequently wins these huge contracts requiring all of these different disciplines, we end up all being on the same team. And it's truly collaborative. We really do sit all down together and workshop ideas and problem solve issues and brainstorm solutions, architects right next to VR specialists. There is a supportive culture of innovation, and I'm not just talking about design and tech, but I'm talking about the process itself. FOREC also has a bunch of task forces and community groups. I don't even know them all. There's the Sustainability Task Force, which I'm on. There's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. We have AutoCAD and BIM groups. We've got mentoring up, mentoring down. We built an office bike. This is us with our cool, it's called L'Orange, our office bike on the left. We go on big bike rides together. We go on global climate strikes together. We've got a book club, a run club, social committees. We do potlucks, Halloween competitions, all the things. My personal favorite, dearest to my heart, is the Climb Club for rock. This is a poster to recruit people on the left. The top image is us at our gym, which we go to a bunch of times a week, and the bottom image is us taking people outdoors. Now I'm just going to go through a few of our recent projects. This was a project I worked on a few years ago in Rome. It was a concept design and master planning scope of about 5 hectares for Rome's soccer team. I think the stadium seat was about 52,000. We designed this as an entertainment destination with a series of pedestrian streets opening up into these grand piazzas, bustling with restaurants and cafes, bars, shops, and markets. I did this project a few years ago in India. It's an eco mall where instead of centering everything around peak consumerism, we positioned a wetland at the center. This 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics water cube venue got a new lease on life. I know this looks like a rendering, but it's an actual photograph. Our concept transformed 11,000 square meters into a luminous underwater fantasy realm. FORC developed a master plan for the Panama Canal, the entire watershed, and identified new opportunities for tourism and hospitality to be implemented over the next 10 years. We've got these incredible concept artists that whip this kind of stuff out in a matter of hours. Our design includes retail, dining, entertainment, hilltop dining, rainforest adventures, and a cruise ship terminal. You probably know this site. It's already a magnet for international and domestic visitors. Sugarloaf Mountain is one of the most recognizable tourist destinations in the world, and FORC has worked on a master plan that improves the shopping experiences, dining, entertainment, and on-site accommodation now. The scheduled reopening is in about 5 years. A competition for the master plan of a new 10 square kilometer eco-city to be built in Tianjin Harbor. FORC's winning scheme is based on a series of ideas that manifest as layers, which together establish the framework for a compelling new city. Neighborhoods are defined by this network of green corridors, activated by deconstructed entertainment elements, and identified by their proximity to the many different marine conditions of this very unique site. We have a lot of very cool clients, Universal Studios, Nickelodeon, Dollywood, Motion Gate, well, it goes on and on. I don't even know them all. But one project that I've been working on for quite a while now is with Lego. And whether those of you who are listening today are designers or not, I'm going to go ahead and guess that you've played with Lego as a kid at some point. Remember how fun it was to become completely immersed in the pirate ship universe, the treehouse, losing yourself in your imagination for hours, inventing new environments and then inhabiting them with these little minifigures. Now imagine growing up to design in full scale these same Lego universes. FORC have been working on Lego projects for decades. And while this is only one of our global family brand clients, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it today because this is what I've spent my last 22 months on. I have to apologize now because they are under very strict NDA, which means I can't show you any of the images. I can't even show you my sketches. But I can tell you about them. The next few slides I put together because I can't show you our project work. They're a little obnoxious. I'm realizing this now. It's okay if you don't like them. They were meant to replace the real cool perspectives that we had. So if you want to close your eyes, I understand. I get it. I see my flaws. I will tell you when to open your eyes again if this is too much for you. So I'm just going to talk about it. For the theme park hotel, we created a whole new look for the facade. From now on, they'll all look as though they're built from these massive, vibrantly colored Lego pieces. We introduced intensive green roofs to the podium and extensive green roofs for all of the rooftops and all of the canopies. We thought, why not make an urban farming zone where veggies and herbs are grown to support the restaurants? What about an edible garden orchard? Can we bring Lego's sustainability superheroes into the playscape? The Castle Hotel, the first 5-star luxury hotel of all Lego resorts. And yes, it is an actual Lego castle that you are inside. We imagined a magical maze where the center spits you into this play tower, and then there's a dragon on top whose fire heats the hot tubs next to the swimming pool, which is surrounded by VIP tents. Bright pink flowering trees and vines cascading down trellises, leading you to the Star Plaza with a media screen. And just around the corner is the Jester's winding mini golf. And for dinner, you venture up to the very highest floor, looking out of the mountains and the sea. The Wizard's Tower Observatory. Potions bubble over the bar, and an entire constellation orbits over your head. Outside on the patio of the Wizard's whimsical, wacky plants and fantastical flora. Did you know that moonflowers only bloom in the evening? Imagine their white flowers glowing in the moonlight as you eat. There's a central large enchanted tree home to the fairies. The wishing well and water wall springs soothing sounds from the corner. And if you look close enough, you might even see a baby dragon sleeping. The Treasure Bay Hotel of the Pirates and Treasure Island sets truly brings out the child spirit in all of us. Rocky coves embrace the small ramshackle village of island characters. Lego creatures greet you up the paths to crow's nests and barnacle treasure maps. Mischievous monkeys chase frogs into the coral reef where you have to crawl underwater tunnels, hop along lily pads, squirting water. Mermaids sit behind the waterfalls and invite children to play in the water and splash around. A giant shipwreck is marooned on a desert island, and trails to treasure chests lead everywhere. Hammocks, sandcastle slides, log hoppers, bridges offer infinite loops of fun and adventure. You can open your eyes now. It's important to take a moment to ask ourselves who our real client is. Is it the client at all? Is it the creative direction partner? Is it the brand? Or is it the 9-year-old girl and her little brother on their summer vacation? That's who I became when I designed these edible garden orchards and rocky coves with waterfalls and mischievous monkeys. But what I'm getting at here is the moment when we're designing, when we let go of control, let go of the idea that we have to put in blood, sweat, and tears, and that if we don't strive all the time, then disaster will result. Instead, we can embrace surrender. Try to find the joy in what we do, enjoy what we're creating, and what is unfolding in front of us. When we get to this flow state, it can be a huge turning point. From there, we are working from a place of soul. from deep authenticity and groundedness. If we clench our fists, we squash out all of the possibility. But if we embrace the flow, we might get to a place that we weren't expecting, and we will actually feel the richness of our journey. I will go through a few of our local projects now. In this project, the building and the landscape, they connect to form a landscape of learning. There's plazas, tiered bleacher seating, and terraces that provide students and teachers with a variety of green spaces. There's the sloped green roof and 2 stormwater management ponds, which enhance the sustainability of the site. This was a competition we won, you might know it. It's the revitalization of a disused pier on a highly industrialized harbor in Hamilton. It began as acknowledging Hamilton's fierce pride in its steel town heritage. There's different components. There's the boatwork promenade, there's the hammer harbor, and the landing. These areas are punctuated with native trees, wetland vegetation, and public art. The pier is designed to connect a waterfront trail system and to be accessible all year round. The project is currently under construction and will open next year. The West Toronto Rail Path is a beloved local project in the Toronto's West End, also my neighborhood. Its major rail corridor was a physical barrier between neighborhoods until we transformed it into this open air linear park and multi-use trail that connects all of the adjacent communities. It runs parallel to the tracks for over 2 kilometers. The spaces we created preserve sensitive Indigenous plantings, conserve a functioning wetland, and include public art pieces all along the way. Phase 1 started in 2009. I think we're currently in phase 2, and there's a realignment phase, which is currently underway. This is one of our more conventional projects. It's called Stanley Green. It's a 4.5-acre municipal park. It might have a more simple program, but we did it so well. A lot of my colleagues go there all the time. It's not even in their neighborhood. It's just a great place to be. The park includes a public pavilion, playground, splash pad, skate park, plaza, sports courts, gardens, and a whole choice of strolling routes. For the rooftop of the Native Child and Family Services of Toronto, we created an oasis where everyone from infants to elders can gather, relax, and reflect. There's a circular fire pit surrounded by log seating, which is positioned nearby an interpretation of a sweat lodge, and there's a bubbling fountain. There's a medicine garden, a 3 Sisters garden, and all kinds of Indigenous species like prairie wildflowers, cedars, and wild grape. Together, these organic elements provide a soothing respite from the very urban setting. We come out of school thinking that we have to get it all right and not make any mistakes. But there is power in making mistakes. When we're afraid of making mistakes, we stick with the familiar. We stick with what we know. Our curiosity is reduced and we live in this kind of vigilant state. Doesn't that limit our potential before it can even start? To truly encourage design innovation, we must make a space where we feel free and safe to explore and make mistakes. Because when we're experimenting, we're learning. And most of the time we fail. For example, think about any great invention: electricity, bicycles, the iPhone, ice cream making machines. These are considered huge breakthroughs, but they stand on hundreds of small mistakes. When to the outside world, it just looks like one big victorious success. I mentioned earlier that I started rock climbing in BC, and I've been obsessed ever since. It's the perfect example of not knowing what you're doing. A few weeks ago, I was bouldering with some friends, and I was standing before the bouldering problem. I was reading the route. I was trying to figure out, okay, my hands go here, my feet go here. It's something I've never done before, this particular route. You just kind of, you think you're maybe good enough, but you're not really sure. It's like maybe a little too hard for you. But at a certain point, you're just like, all right, I'm just gonna throw myself at the wall, go for it. So I tried, and I got up like a third of the way and fell on my butt. And as I was turning around, I was so disappointed in myself. I was like, oh man, that was so brutal. Everyone saw me. But as I fully turned around, there was like 10 of my friends there smiling at me, cheering at me, calling my name. I was rewarded with fist bumps and high fives and pats on the back. Everyone was cheering. Imagine if we could make design cultures as supportive as that, as safe as that. To acknowledge openly that every victory, every success is a compounding of all of these mistakes and learnings that have come before. Imagine how much more open and curious and creative we would be. When I think about ambition now, it's not in the context of becoming a starchitect and having my own firm by a certain age. It's more abstract and soulful than that. I called this talk, I literally do not know what I'm doing, because I don't, and neither do you. No one does. We make it up as we go along, and that is perfectly okay. I don't think I would have admitted that when I was younger. I believed that vulnerability put me at risk and showed weakness. But I know now that it's also a strength. As a designer, I think it's important to be able to embrace that wildness. In his book, Listening to Design, Andrew Levitt calls us to action. He urges us to trust and be faithful to our creative instincts. That part of being an adult is expressing something you're unsure about. It's about having a deeper confidence in your own creative spirit and following where that spirit leads you. That's it. The end. Thank you.
Whoa, thank you. Oh, there's a big hand there. Sorry. That was a wonderful lecture. That was wonderful. I mean, I think the very, very interesting sort of singular thing was led by curiosity. I guess one. Sorry. One question I had was, what's the most fearful thing that you had to face in that journey? Sorry.
The most fearful thing I had to face in that journey?
Yes.
I think, I guess feeling like I had to make these decisions alone on my own. That makes making big decisions really, really hard. It makes them insurmountable. And remembering that none of us are truly alone, I think I learned that through a lot of those transitions, that friends and mentors and family are always just a phone call away, even if you are thousands of miles away.
It was a very, very inspiring lecture altogether, and I think I really appreciate your honesty, and also you put it all together very eloquently too. So I think that's very accessible for us. So and a lot of, I'm sure a lot of the student audience and also younger and professionals appreciate as well. And the idea of mistake and the fact that you can reach out to your friends and colleagues nearby, I think all these are real sort of experience that you've experienced that you're sharing with us. So thank you very much for sharing all that. And I really think, I mean, I was wondering throughout the whole journey that you're explaining to us, where do you get the energy? Where do you get the energy? Where's this source of energy from? So that was my sort of curiosity on top of your journey, sort of as you laid it out. So what's the source of energy you think that we can sort of hold on? I think it's a very timely lecture because all of us, as we probably agree, and all of us here in the audience, are quite fatigued to in the context of this forever not ending kind of pandemic, but and this wonderful journey of honesty and being able to mistake as way as part of exploration. I think that's great. But where do you keep the energy from? Where do you source the energy from?
I'll just circle back to one of the other things you said first is I think that's because of the last 2 years. I think I don't think I would have lectured or spoken on these topics before that. I think there's something that has emerged in the last few years, the hardships of working from home and the pandemic, the climate crisis, the BLM movement, like all of these extremely necessary things, but also really difficult things that have happened that I feel like have just sort of propelled us into like speaking our truths, like just being more honest and just being sort of real about where we are and just meeting each other wherever we are. And I feel like there's a big sort of collective, I don't know, breath let out when you can do that. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk about that today. In terms of where I get my energy, I've honestly never thought about it, but I think probably for me, I find immense grounding and sort of recharging in being outdoors with friends, sometimes passively, but most often climbing or hiking. It gives me all of my enthusiasm and breathes so much life into me. And I think it's important for everyone to find out like what that is for themselves and to do what makes you come alive. Hold on to that.
Well, thank you for the advice. Now, William, you have a comment there. I want to resonate what he's quoting you from. Give yourself permission to be playful. I think that's what you said, Anna, and one of the students here is resonating your comment there.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, I can't see the comment.
Oh, William, do you want to sort of speak to this note that you wrote here? If you're in the audience.
Yeah. No, I commented that I really appreciate how vulnerable you were in this presentation and just the stories that you told. It was really, really inspiring. And I made a note of one thing you said. It's give yourself permission to be playful and, do the things that you like and don't focus on being an expert at everything. I thought that was just really, really important for everyone in design school right now and further in their careers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is really important. And it's hard for us, I think, when we're in the process to not be constantly focusing on the results that we want, but the results are just an outcome. And I think trying to spend more time in that sort of playful, explorative state, like that's the real fun stuff. That's where you'll come up with the most interesting, compelling, authentic design, I think. Thank you for that comment, William.
Sorry, I was saying, we recorded your lecture, so we'll probably be able to hear your words a little bit more carefully and dissect them and really digest them. I think it was wonderful, really dense, sort of inspirational, sort of and honest, and really, we can relate to what you went through. I'm sure a lot of students will as well as they go through their career path as well. And it's your career is not orthodox. It's atypical in terms of how you led yourself, but I think one thing that is singular in your whole lecture and journey to me was the curiosity, which I think it's so inspiring how you led your career through constant curiosity and constant sort of exploration through curiosity. So thank you for a wonderful time that you spent with us. I know you lead a very exciting and but at the same time busy team at your end of practice. Well, thanks for joining us, giving us this inspiration. We'll hope to reconnect soon. I know you're a Winnipegger, so I'm sure we'll cross each other again. Thank you for giving us this wonderful time together as well.
You're very welcome anytime. And thank you for this opportunity. Again, I'm just really honored. I'm
Okay.
grateful.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next lecture. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks all.
Talk to you later.